burner item for public discussion
Certainly.
in our state and in the General Assembly, and that's been a very good thing for education. The governor's proposal has several elements. There are proposals about changes in testing, replacing the Ohio graduation test with the ACT or the American College test and some other kinds of assessments. There are proposals to change the teacher licensing system to make more of a career path and to make teachers have to spend longer time in their profession before they would achieve a tenure or a continuing contract. There are proposals to add 2 days a year to the school year over a period of 10 years, which would be a total of 20 more days, which is roughly 1 month more of schooling. There are some changes in the funding structure. So I have some of those. I feel support for some of those elements, and some of them I have some questions about. But it's good to have people talking about education reform.
Certainly. As a board member, actually as a board, the entire body, do you put your seal of approval on this by a vote or I would say a recommendation? Yeah, I guess a recommendation.
The board historically submits a budget every 2 years. We put together a budget that we think is the right number for public education in Ohio. We submit that to both the governor and the General Assembly. The governor then makes whatever changes he wants in the budget that we give him and passes it on to the General Assembly as an executive budget, or the governor's budget.
I see.
The legislature is aware when they receive the governor's budget as to how it's different from what the state board recommended, because they also got a copy of our initial recommendation that we gave to the governor. And then the legislature ultimately decides what's passed into law.
Well, this really, then your role as a board member, or the role of the board, goes right to the heart of DeRolf, which had to do with the cost of funding public education. Is that?
Well, that's partly true. Another major factor in DeRolf was considering the question of the property tax system. And the property tax system, which is where the local funding for education comes from, is a matter of state law. The State Board of Education has very little to do with that aspect of funding. We have more voice in the state share of school funding.
I see.
And districts will vary quite a bit, but I can give you some state averages.
Yeah,
Currently, school districts in Ohio are spending around $9,000 a year to educate each student. And roughly half of that comes from local funding and half comes from state funding. Now, there are some school districts where, because of their higher wealth districts, and there would be some districts like that in my district, in this area, in your viewers' area, some of those districts, because they have higher property wealth than other parts of the state, will only be getting maybe $3,000 per student from the state, and they'll be paying $6,000 or $7,000 from local sources. Other districts in more rural and Appalachia areas of Ohio, it would be the reverse. They would be getting more like $6,000 or $7,000 per student from the state and only putting up $3,000 or $4,000 of their own money.
Where was the issue with DeRolf? I mean, the complaint was there's inequitable funding for certain high wealth districts versus the poor districts. But from the state's point of view, it sounds like there's been some effort to equalize that.
Yes, it depends on who you ask as to how successful the state has been in responding to DeRolf. The members of the General Assembly, I think, at least from past legislatures, felt that they had increased the funding significantly, and there were significant increases in education funding following DeRolf. There's certainly another point of view, generally held by local districts, or at least some of the local districts, that it was too little too late. The Supreme Court had to consider the question. The DeRolf lawsuit was based on two words in the state constitution, because the state constitution says that the state shall provide a thorough and efficient system of common schools.
I see.
So the words thorough and efficient were the key words to define in settling the DeRolf case. The allegation in the DeRolf suit was that because of the way we finance public education in Ohio, the system cannot be thorough or efficient. And so that's what the legislature then had to deal with. The Supreme Court agreed with the plaintiffs in the DeRolf case and said that in fact they concurred that the system was not thorough and efficient.
But an issue then that came out of this was the over-reliance on property tax. Is that correct?
Yes, that was a main factor. That wasn't the only factor in the court's decision, but that was a main factor.
Well, in what's before us now, and what the governor has proposed and the legislature is taking a look at now or working on, is that addressed in any way, shape, or form as far as burden on property tax?
Property taxation is a factor. There is a provision in the governor's proposal to allow school districts to pass a conversion levy, which in effect brings some of the property tax money out from under the restriction of House Bill 920, which was passed back in the late 70s during a period of rapid inflation of property values. And people found that their property tax values were climbing astronomically during that time, and schools were getting windfalls of revenue from the millage that had been passed. And so House Bill 920 was passed, which basically said that whatever is the amount of money raised by a levy at the time it's passed by the voters is the maximum amount of money that will ever be collected from that levy. So as property values go up, the millage is adjusted downward by the county auditor so that the same sum of money is collected from the taxpayers.
Now that 920 law is still in effect even within the governor's proposal?
Well, the House Bill 920, yes, is still in effect, and the governor's proposal does not repeal that, but it creates some conversion levy options where local districts could vote to bring some of their tax base out from under the restriction of House Bill 920.
So there was some relief granted here or there?
Well, it's the option to grant it by local. Each school district's voters would have to pass those levies in order to change that.
In your opinion, what are the successes about Ohio schools today?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because with the conversation focusing on the problems in the funding system and so forth, it's easy for the public to get a somewhat negative view or perspective on their schools. 10 or 12 years ago, Ohio schools were ranked nationally about in the middle of the pack. We were down 15th or 20th in the nation, something like that. In the most recent ranking, we were 7th in the nation. And that is during a time when all states are trying to improve their state education system. So if Ohio had done nothing but maintain our current level, we would have actually fallen behind in the rankings because all the other states were striving to advance. So in a climate where all the states were trying to advance their education systems, we shot from the middle of the pack up to the top 10. And the rating scales weren't changed during that time. It was real improvement. We've also made some progress in closing the achievement gap, which is the standardized testing scores among the different subgroups of racial groups of students. And that's a particular concern of mine, that we need to do more. Our progress is in inches rather than in miles on that, and I think we need to make faster progress on that front.
Well, that's really encouraging, though. I mean, you're right. I mean, in the climate that, well, we hear about the budget process and taxes, and it does sort of overshadow oftentimes, I think, of the good things that we're doing.
Oftentimes we see headlines about broken school funding system and that sort of thing, and I'm always grateful if the media phrases it just that way and says a broken school funding system. It's not a broken school system.
I'm going to say.
Academically, our schools have improved tremendously. There's always improvements more to be made, but we've done well.
But that is encouraging. That's very encouraging. Flipping the coin, what do you think, Rob, as far as challenges that are still facing us? And they're still there. Leaving the, I mean, I'm sure we both agree, everybody agree, with this school funding issue
Right.
has to be addressed, is being addressed. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue for
Right.
a decade that I know of, and so, but other challenges maybe then.
Well, one challenge in education always is to keep the curriculum relevant to what people need. No one who taught me when I was in school could have predicted what my profession would be now, because I'm doing something now that I had no interest at all in when I was in school. I